Welcome to the SAG-AFTRA Foundation's The Business Program. I'm Audrey Cleo Yap. I'm an entertainment journalist. So happy to be here. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our panel, Liz Hanna, Annie Weisman,
Hi.
Sera Gamble, Silka Luisa, and Liz Flahive. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. What a powerhouse panel we have here. So I want to do kind of some level setting, some back to basic stuff. How would you describe what a showrunner does, and how did you find your way into this position?
I'm not going first.
Sera, I nominate Sera.
Yeah, Sera go.
Here, Annie. In television, a showrunner is the boss of the show, essentially. There are several kind of arms or tentacles of the octopus. There's the writer's office, there's production, there's what's happening on set, and there's what's happening in post. And the one person who straddles all of those different parts of making a show is the showrunner. Usually that person is a writer, because television is a story being told over a long period of time. So it behooves us to have the person who's in charge be the person who's kind of holding the story in their brain so that the decisions are made based on what's going to support that.
And what was your trajectory getting into a showrunner position?
I worked my way up the ladder. I started as a staff writer, which is the lowest title on the ladder of being in a writer's room. I was in a writer's room for 4 seasons, and I was made an executive producer. And that season they said, we're going to train you to be the showrunner. And I took that show over in season 6. So I was one of those fortunate people who was on a show that went for long enough that I could learn how to be a showrunner on that show.
Fantastic. Liz Hanna, I know you said you didn't want to go first. So would you be willing to go second?
Sure. Yes. Because Sera is the best of us, so she should always be going first. I have no notes on what a showrunner is. I think that's exactly right. I sort of, for lack of a better word, stumbled into it because I had a lot of experience in producing and in writing. I'd done features, and I'd spent the first 10 years of my career in production. And in features, the writer is not the boss. So I wanted to be more involved, I think, in the producerial aspect, but I also want to be involved in for longevity. In features, often you leave before production. I've been fortunate enough to be involved in a lot of the features I've written throughout production, but not as much or as in control as in television. And so I ended up working on Mindhunter was my first show, and I sort of came up from there. And then PLAINVILLE was my first show. The Girl from PLAINVILLE was the first show I show ran.
Wonderful.
I'll go next. I had a little bit of a different journey too, which is interesting to hear how everyone kind of finds a different way in. When I first moved out to LA, I actually tried really, really hard to get staffed. I didn't know anyone. And so I kept getting really, really close to getting staffed, and I just couldn't get in a room. And then I got really, really lucky. And a pilot sample that I had actually got shot, and it didn't go to series, but it was like my first, way in. And then after that, I was able to get staffed, and I was in a lot of different rooms. I bounced around in a lot of different mini rooms, shows that ran for 1 season. And Shining Girls is also my first show. So I developed it, worked on it for 4 or 5 years, and then we finally made it.
Well, I'll go next. I started out as a playwright and sidestepped into TV writing from there, really worked my way up the ladder, not as quickly as Sera. It took a really long time because I had the more common experience of being on probably 7 in a row shows that were just 1 season and out. So you never get that chance to kind of grow with the show until I finally got the opportunity to be on a sturdier, more long running show where I could get a lot of episodes under my belt and really learn more about production. And then from there, wrote a lot of pilots until I finally got one that got picked up. And that was my first time being in the showrunner's chair. And like many things, I think I knew a lot about it from sitting next to it for a long time. I thought I did until I sat in that chair, and it was completely different than I thought it would be. But I was ready to do it. It's just you don't really realize until you do it, how difficult it is and how much responsibility it is. But there's also so much pleasure in getting to be the person who's making the decisions, like Sera said, because you are the person who conceived of all the characters. And so to be able to see it through and to be in charge of that decision making was, it was really gratifying by that time in my career. And then now with physical, it's, my second show running, my first one creating really from nothing, from an idea, from an original idea. And yeah, so that's how I got here today with you guys, that I'm all of whom I'm a huge fan of.
Amazing. And of course, Liz Flahive, tell us your story.
I'm somewhere between Annie and Sera. I started as a playwright and was sort of poking around in TV to try to support my playwriting habit, and landed on Nurse Jackie, and was on that show for all 7 seasons, which was really fortunate. And the show sort of switched hands in the middle of its run. And at that point, I never got to show run that show, but that was the first time I got a taste of getting to have some agency in terms of staffing the room. And, the way we sort of divided things up was I was more on set for that show than the other showrunners. So as much as I don't feel like I got the full impact of show running until Glow, I feel like getting to see a show all the way from the first episode to the last episode was pretty extraordinary. But then Glow was the first show that I co-show ran with Carly Mensch, my writing partner, and Roar was the second.
I like that you call your playwriting a habit.
I mean, if you cannot pay your rent, doing it's a habit.
Yeah, if I say, if it doesn't give you health insurance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How do I figure out how to have kids? Oh, not by being a playwright. At least not for me. So, but it was, I mean, I don't know. I feel like I got a lot of creative satisfaction out of writing for television, sort of right out of the gate, which was surprising. So I think initially I thought it would be a job, and it ended up being, a place I really felt like I could find a way to actual self-expression, which was surprising.
Yeah. Well, because the audience watching this is going to be a lot of performers, I actually want to talk about the casting process and how involved all of you are when it comes to your project. So Liz Flahive, I actually want to start with you because with Roar, it's pretty unique. It's an anthology. You have 8 different leads, 8 vignettes. How did you go about casting for this? And was it more or less difficult than, if you're just dealing with one show, one cast?
I mean, I will say, I think an anthology is, it was way harder than we thought, but the casting process was really similar to everything we do, which is, I think with all of the things I've never cast anything off of a pitch. We've always given an actor a script and had a conversation. And that's what happened with Roar too. Every single episode, we had a script, we sent it to an actor, we got on the phone with every single actor, we talked about it, we had a process. And I think that, and we enjoy that. I think partially coming from theater, where that's just sort of what you do all the time when you're making plays. The actors are really involved in that process. So it's something we did with each episode, had conversations, went back, did another draft, we're in process with each of those actors to make sure that we all felt like we were on the same page and telling the same story. But we've always had, with Glow as well, just a lot of, we're very vocal about casting. We're involved in every part. I think that's true of all showrunners. You see the big parts, you see the little parts. it's part of the fun too, you know, as you're building a whole world. So
amazing.
I just wanted to jump in because I think this goes to what Sera was saying before, is like the thing that you really don't understand, Annie, what you were saying is so right. The thing that you don't understand about being a showrunner is that like the second that the writer's room ends, writing becomes like 40% of your job, if you're lucky. Like everything else, even on the day if you're covering set, the rewriting is like, you know, a quarter of the time. The rest is putting out fires, particularly if you're the only covering writer and producer. And I think like that is really important to keep in mind when you're casting, because you have to cast, and all of the shows that you guys run are so well cast. And so sort of fascinated about how you approach it, because I feel like for me, it's somebody who can take what's on the page and run with it, and who can give me, and who I can have conversations with in the casting process that I understand on set. If they have notes, will be succinct in a way that like we can respond to them quickly, or the process is something that we're on the same page and we're all kind of like at the core understanding what these characters and the story or the show is, so that there's not like a hang up, because you just don't have time for it. Like even in prep, it would be so lovely to be like, oh, we had like lunches and dinners with our cast. It was like, I talked to Chloe Sevigny, I think for like 3 hours in one Zoom meeting before she came on set the first day of filming. Because Chloe was cast like 5 days before we went into production. And that's just like how it happens sometimes. But I think it's such a, I don't really have an answer. I guess it's more of a question for the group. I'm just sort of like curious, because when we made the show, Elle Fanning was already attached, and I'd worked with Elle before. And so there was like a shorthand there that was really helpful going into it. I knew that alleviated a lot of my stress, because I was like, if something was not working on the day, I could sort of figure that out. But I hadn't worked with a lot of the other actors, and you just in television, you just don't have time to like develop that relationship and figure it out, particularly like on a limited. I was like on episode 6, I think we had a shorthand, and then we were like, see you later. So, you know, I think that, you know, I think it just takes there's that time that it takes. So I don't know. It's really, it's more of a statement. I'm just curious to kind of how everybody has experienced that. And if you've like in your careers found ways to approach the casting process where you say that early on, or you have those conversations, or like how you look for cast that way. I don't know.
For me, what was really helpful was Elizabeth Moss actually came on really, really early. And so I only had one script written, and she became not just the lead of the show, but also a creative partner. And so because she was there throughout writing of the whole season, she also had the show inside of her, and we had time for those conversations. So then you have another actor on set who's in the scene with the other ones, who knows what the intention of the scene is. They know where the show is going, and they have it in their bones in the same way that you do. So having another voice, another advocate on set was really helpful in having her sort of play that role. But yeah, it's when it's like you're under the gun and people are asking for like line, it's stressful.
You had a lot of timey-wiminess too, which, and like Sera, I don't know how you keep mythology in your head when you're covering. So you have like the most, I mean, on Magicians, you had like the most mythology that ever has existed in the history of man. So
I wasn't holding it in my head all by myself. I mean, all the writers were, and the script coordinator, and yeah, that was an interesting show because I think it was an ensemble, and I think almost all of them, it was the first time they had their name on a chair. Like they'd never, maybe they'd had some recurring roles, maybe one or two of them had been, pilots, this, that, but they were all very young. So I was experiencing, because, mostly I had the experience of like someone like David Duchovny, or more recently Penn Badgley, who comes onto the project as a star, has a certain amount of power over the situation. And then this was just like all these people who were watching their dreams come true were series regulars for the first time. And I learned a lot from that, because I had taken for granted what the pace of television is for an actor. And also, to be frank, the amount of surrender that has to happen. I started as an actor, I was trained as an actor, and I try very hard to speak that language. But I think I also did a lot of theater, and like, I really got to like walk around in those shoes and figure a lot of shit out and talk a lot to the director in those situations. And on TV, the moment the clock starts at the beginning of the day, it's a race. And one of the director's superpowers may be that they're making you feel heard and taking time for you and able to work with actors, but really the clock is going in their head the whole time. And I didn't realize before then, just saying this because there's so many actors watching this, that coming into a TV situation on the understanding that it's that kind of a machine, I think brings a lot of peace, because I feel like if you can somewhat set aside the feeling of like, we're going to be doing repertory theater and embrace the type of art and craft that you're making, the actors I see do that are happier.
Yeah, I think also just to speak to that, because on Glow, we had a lot of people who it was their first time, sometimes their first time on television for some of our actors, like matching was something we explained on day one, to a couple of them. But we tried to also have conversations before we hit set as much as possible, like that we had not just with our series regulars, but with every single recurring cast member. We just did a character meeting, and it took a ton of time, but we sat down, we stepped out their season, we talked about it, we talked about their questions, and we did that during prep. And then when we hit set, we weren't in the sort of weeds. We were in the weeds on other things, but we weren't in the weeds on having character conversations, which I think was really helpful, because you realize, like, actors are, especially in TV, like you're just alone with your thoughts and your script. And, I think that alleviated some of that sort of actor stress before they came to set and as they were building characters. So they knew they had already had some time to have a conversation with us, and we weren't having it as we were lighting. So that was something that was really helpful to us, and we actually did every single season.
We relied so much on our casting directors too. We worked with Laura Rosenthal and Jodie Angstretch, and they because we didn't have time, and we were shooting during COVID, which I know affected everybody. So it's, we couldn't have, I think, like the intimacy in terms of like, and then also everything changes. You're like, we're talking about these scenes. You're like, just kidding. Everyone's got down. We're going to this is one person in a room by themselves. JK, so I feel like everything was changing all times. And so I was communicating so much with our casting director, Patrick McManus, my co-showrunner, and I were communicating so much of like, this is the type of person we need. I bring up Chloe just because it took so long to cast that role, where I was like, we need somebody who's funny. Like, we need somebody who has a sense of humor, because the role was written with a sense of humor, but like the role in the show is she's basically like a study of grief through 8 episodes, and it's a really heavy role to play. And we needed somebody who could find levity that wasn't really written in, that could find those little moments. And I remember the first time I ever talked to Chloe, she like said something, I don't remember what, but she like said something kind of like to the side very slyly. And I was like, oh, okay, you get this. It's like, that's not going to be a concern for me. Like, she had that kind of like innate sense of humor, like kind of, I think she calls it her wry wit, that like could come into the show. But it was like finding those innate things in actors that aren't on the page, that like, that's what alleviated the trust for me. Cause we just didn't, it's the first time we would write a scene and talk about it and then be like, just kidding. No,
I love it when I know for us, the casting process, it can be so many things. There's so many different ways you can find and fall in love with an actor for a role. But my favorite thing that happens is when it's not who you're looking for that gets the part. And I love when that happens. And I was really worried in the world of Zoom auditions that some of that magic will be lost. And, I was happy to see that you can still, this is a screen medium, that magic can still come through. I'd rather be in the room with people, but, I think it expanded our reach in some ways, because, beyond just who can show up in LA in that moment. But I think that's my favorite thing that happens, is when I have a really clear idea in my head of who it is and I'm wrong about it, because somebody else comes in and they win it and they have a take on it and they make a choice, and it's really exciting. It changes the way you think. And then you get excited because then that changes the way you see the character too. And now we're going to take it in a different direction. And, we've had a lot of those magic moments, and I revere actors. I think there's so much they can do that I can't do. I love their bravery. I love their vulnerability. And so, those are the great moments to me, is when someone is just an absolute surprise. And one of the things I love our casting director, Susie Ferris, and we've worked together for years. And she's always kind of challenging me because she goes, okay, tell me about this character. And I'll give her this long monologue about who it is. And then I'll be wrong because someone will walk in the door, and she opens the door wider than I ask her to on purpose. And she's like, I know you said this, but I think this guy's pretty special. Check him out. And I'll often, she'll be right about that.
Yeah, casting directors are such huge advocates for actors, especially when you're like, it's extraordinary. And it's something I think sometimes because it's so intimidating and it can be so stressful, and they seem like a barrier to a project. But honestly, like, the people who fight the hardest for actors are casting directors. The people who are going to give showrunners and writers like the details we don't have are great casting directors, I should say, like who really open your eyes to other things. I totally agree, Annie. Like, people who will just like push the boundaries of what you're looking for in a way that is part of that like creative process.
Yeah.
I always love it when when your casting director latches onto something about a character that like you mention in like 3 words, and that's what unlocks the character for them and like opens up a new sort of avenue of actors. I think that's always so interesting. And you feel like because you're the writer, you're the showrunner, you have it locked in your head of like who this person is. And then for them, it's exactly what you're saying, Annie. And then they sort of just can see what you're saying, but it's like 30 degrees changed. It's just it's such a collaboration, which I think is the whole point of showrunning. It's all collaboration.
Sounds like it, and juggling a lot of different types of jobs. And to that end, Liz, Hannah, I'm glad that you mentioned a little bit about how COVID upended a lot of things for production and for showrunners like yourselves and for anybody working on a production. So to that end, I actually want to talk about mentorship. There was a really good article that came out in Vice, or a really interesting article that came out in Vice about showrunners and sort of how the pandemic has affected the ability for young up-and-comers to be mentored, and especially being, this is an all-women showrunning panel. I wonder how much of that sentiment you're all feeling in this sort of post-COVID production reality, and the importance of mentorship to help bring up other women, people from marginalized groups into positions similar as yours.
I mean, I think it's frustratingly nearly impossible at this point. I'm not shooting right now, but during production of Us, like, we couldn't bring any of our writers or support staff to set because of COVID protocols. And that's just such an enormous disservice to the staff, because again, like, part of being a showrunner, you can learn part of it being in a room, but then everything else is what you learn on set, what you learn on prep, what how you can be a part of it on a daily basis, and how you see things change and move. And Sera, you were saying that you didn't have all magicians in your head. It's because I assume you had staff on set helping cover that wasn't just you. And that's like an enormous, on Plainville, I was able to bring our number 2, our supervising producer, Ashley Michael Hoban, to Savannah for us for the entirety of the shoot. I wouldn't have survived without her. Like, there's just no way. And in terms of mentorship, I mean, Annie, you were already talking about it, like, you were on 7 shows that were 1 season. It's really difficult in the way that things are now without longevity in television, and that people have turnover very quickly, and there's just not a lot of consistency. So I think it's very much on the showrunners to make it a point to be mentors, to make it a point to be available for younger up and coming generations, for women, for people of color, for any marginalized group who have been marginalized in the entertainment in particular, to, I think, have a voice in this. But it is also, I think, really important that studios and networks understand that part of the budget has to be to sending writers to set. It's I think at this point, it's one of the things that immediately got removed from the budget, from a line of the budget once COVID hit. And for me, it's like unacceptable to not have that back in the budget. Like, you can have brick and mortar writers' rooms. I'm fine. I need my writers on set. It nearly killed me making this show because I didn't have anybody except Hoban. And thank God I did, but like writers are not expendable, and there's a reason that we have them on staff for X amount of years. So sorry, I can rant about this for a while.
No, it's really true. And COVID really like gave them, an easy, it was like, oh, now this is an easier cut. Cause you always had to fight for those weeks on some level.
Always, yeah.
We were always like, oh, we want the writers around more. Oh, and for an anthology, like we had all the scripts written, but as like, I want those writers on set, and we had to fight for that. We had to fight for that access. We had to fight for them to be in post. But, I think it's also part of it is, I think that's like Liz is saying, like that is part of the job. It's just it's not just access. It's also allowing people to follow things all the way through, because that's the full experience. And I don't know, I think I personally have been in situations where you get a piece of the access, but not the whole thing. It's like, oh, you can be in this writer's room and you can be on set, but you can't be in post, and like there's some sort of line. And I think part of it too is, and this is something that I think I always wanted, but when we came to Glow was something that Genji Kohan always did on all her shows, was she was like, I'm training showrunners. You should be in every single step. You should be in music spotting. You should, and so it wasn't like you as a person who was trying to hold on to a job was trying to claw your way into more meetings, into more experiences. You were given the invitation and you just had to continue to show up. And I think that's sort of true mentorship, is like making space for people and making sure that space is real and the experience is genuine.
It was also really hard with the Zoom room. That felt like, especially for writing assistants, especially for lower level writers, you just don't have lunch. You don't have those conversations where you get to talk to them about what they're working on, what their interests are. It's really just, you do the work, you try and get through it, because it's hard to foster sort of those looser moments, or the moments where you're sort of giving them a window into, oh, I had this budget conversation, this is what we're talking about. And those conversations just can't happen on Zoom. So I think that sets you up then for people that don't have a window in. So then when you go into production, they've already been shut out. And then when you go into post, they've really already been shut out, and they just never get on the train where they're really integrated into the show.
Well, I want to hear from Sera and Annie, your experiences with mentorship, how that's been challenged in a post-COVID reality. Love to hear from you too.
Yeah, the same challenges for me in terms of, it's been really important for me and my career to be just changing the pipeline, from the way it was when I started out. And so that means it's about inclusion and diversity on all levels, but also in that pipeline of those entry-level jobs. And so not being able to offer the casual access to the process, the formal access is part of it. The casual access is so key for people, especially people that don't grow up, that aren't the children of showrunners or showrunners' neighbors, which is a lot of how I started out. It was like, who are all these assistants? Oh, they're the children of showrunners' neighbors. Those are who are all getting all the opportunities. It was just, I don't know, people would walk their dogs and then give their neighbors' kids jobs. And
it's a 1-to-1 ratio. I totally
they weren't
get
all the
it.
best they weren't all the best in the writers, sadly. So try not to do that. Try to give access to people that wouldn't maybe otherwise have access to. But and so that was really tough, to be prevented from doing that. So that's getting a little better. I try to look for ways to kind of keep that access going, just have, be available for questions, be available for things. But yeah, just really trying. Remarkable to hear about people like, Genji Kohan is a goddess for the way that she opened up the process to so many people. That was not true of a lot of the people I worked for initially. So I try to do that kind of thing as well. And so, yeah, it's getting better, but not gonna lie, that was very tough to be prevented from doing that, because that's so much of what you're offering with those jobs. It was tough not to be able to offer it for a while.
Mentorship is very important to me for just the same reasons that Annie was just saying. I think certain things in the short term happened because of COVID, but I think in the long run, we'll see that COVID is just an accelerator of trends that have been happening in the business for 4 or 5 years before. I mean, I've been doing this for long enough that I started on a network show that was 22 episodes a season. So we had to be writing while we were producing. And now it's very unusual to the people I work for that I want the time period of the writer's room to be just a little bit shorter so there's some overlap, because I prefer to finish breaking and writing the season, first of all, with more writers, but also once I see some of the work that the actors are doing, because that one day of seeing an actor in the role can change everything. But that makes the newer generation of executives very nervous because they're used to a 24-week writer room that ends, and then the showrunner begs for 1 or 2 people to stay through production because one person can't do the job. It's a bit of a bummer. It didn't used to have to be so much of a fight. And one of the reasons I like go on social media, I try to answer questions. I try to like be open and have people who don't have other access and who don't have a neighbor who's a showrunner just like ask me anything. Part of it is in response to the fact that we're more siloed than we used to be. And it is a lot more difficult for us to just kind of pass along the stuff we learned the hard way. I really learned almost everything the hard way. Did not have connections when I got in, was the only woman in the writer's room pretty often. And I learned by getting bruised and making mistakes and being told off and losing opportunities. And I don't want that to happen for the people who most need to be speaking and to have the platform, which is anybody but that dude I worked for over and over and over again. For the first 7 or 8 years of my career. But yeah, so I don't know. I read that Vice article and I was pretty bummed out by it because I found it pretty accurate. And I think in the short term, there are economic realities that studios are dealing with, contractions, like just bottom line number stuff. And a full writer's room is in the 6 figures a week to open and to run. So I understand why that's an expense that, because it's more long-term, it's like preventive health. It's like the kind of thing that keeps you from getting cancer later, but it's hard to justify that in a quarter where you're being told, if you can't squeeze a little bit more out of these shows that are in production, we're going to fire you because our corporation is in trouble this quarter. So is there a crisis? Yeah. I mean, in a couple of years, there's going to be so many shows. Right now, there are so many shows.
Yeah, we're there.
So many people who have never been on set. And yeah, so I don't know. At this point, I'm going to just like sit back, pop popcorn, invite anyone who's ever worked for me to text me with their questions and see what happens.
I think there's like the other thing that I will add to that is, there's so much content that like, I think content has been more important than quality for a bit. We're trending to, yeah, but we just need more, and expecting viewers to watch what's on. And I don't know, I think as creators, we're like, we want it to be good. Like we want to be proud of what we're making. I don't write in a bubble. Like I don't write by myself. When you're a showrunner, when you're making television, you have a writer's room. There's a lot of people involved in it. There's a lot of people, Sera, you were saying, like that hold things in their head so you don't have to. The idea that like suddenly we can appear on set and do all of this by ourselves and produce a level and of quality that hopefully we've achieved in the writer's room, but continue to produce that on set is really quite a high expectation. And I think puts a lot of pressure on not just the showrunner, but the talent that is in it and all of your collaborators that are there, when there is like a quite easy solution, which is just make it how it used to be and give us our staff when we're shooting. Because if you have the writer who wrote that episode on set, you do not have to be the one that is at all times answering the questions, controlling what's happening. You can do the other jobs the 9,000 other jobs you have to do. And on top of it, that person is getting the experience. I think the majority of the writers I know in writers' rooms have never even stepped on set. And that is not their fault in any way. I don't want that to see what I'm saying. That is just something that is so unacceptable to me. Like that we are not training a full generation of television writers to have the full experience. And again, Liz, as you were saying, full experience in on set and in post and throughout. Like you have to see the whole thing. And I think quality is important. And I think the only way you maintain a significant quality of television is by looking at how we've done that in the past. And we have had teams doing it. It is a collaborative process. This is not the business of auteurs. This is the business of collaborators. And so I just don't think we can do it by ourselves. And I'm not good at it by myself. So I need this to be fixed because I don't want to do it anymore.
And Liz, Hannah, pardon me if this is sort of pedestrian, but do you find asking for that extra budget, asking for that extra whatever more difficult as a woman showrunner?
Oh, no, well, I'm not a man, so I don't have a comparison. I will say I've never asked from that gender, so I don't know. I don't know. I don't know that it's like, have I spent a lot of my career as the only woman? Sera, as you said, totally. Have I also like seen a shift? Yes. Or there are, I think the majority of the executives I work with are women now. So I don't know that I have that. I can't say that I don't have anything to compare it to, but I just think like anything as a showrunner is a fight for in this situation that we're in now. And particularly when you're asking things that have already been removed as a budget line to get them back in is just sort of, is really difficult. So I don't know. I don't think it's gender specific. I just think it's money specific. I just don't think that we want to spend money on that. And I also get that. It's everything Sera says is true. I mean, it's hard. I don't envy the position of trying to figure out how to make money out of a lot of this, a lot of what we do. I'm going to stop talking.
What you're saying. I feel like I can answer that question a little bit because I've worked alongside male co-showrunners frequently. And because a lot of my friends are male showrunners. And is it harder? I feel like harder is not a word that helps us, not a word that helps me get up in the morning. Mm-hmm. If you think about your job as a showrunner in one respect, what we do is we look at this giant sea of possibility and we pick our battles because you're not going to get everything. And a lot of our skill as writers and as producers and as people's bosses is to like say, this can change, but this must stay. And once you kind of have that skill and you know what you need to fight for and you know what you can let go and you know what you can trade for it, because everything's a little bit of a negotiation, it's about finding a way to negotiate that is effective for you. And I could say as a generalization that the way that I negotiate is different than the showrunners I know who are male, who have kind of commensurate experience, who like me have worked on 3+ shows as a showrunner. They wouldn't do it my way. I wouldn't do it their way because I won't get what I want. And do I use more words than they do? Yeah. Do I have to answer more questions? I do. But nobody gave me this job telling me it would be perfect parity, that I would have it exactly as easy as my friend who is a 55-year-old white man. Like, of course, no, I took the job anyway, knowing that I would have the set of just challenges and advantages that I do. So I feel like the bottom line is you can figure it out. You can make it work. You'll be frustrated some of the time, but a lot of the time you'll get better and better at getting what you want, which is the fun part about being a showrunner.
Yeah. One common theme I'm hearing from all of you is how passionate you are about working with actors and having them inspire you, to have them help you see something in a different way, see your show a different way, see your script in a different way. So to that end, my last question to everybody is, what's a piece of advice you can give to an actor to make a showrunner's job easier?
I'll say a few things. I can see people thinking what they're going to say. Well, I think one thing is if you do table reads on your show, not everyone does, really show up for those table reads. And that is the opportunity that the writers have to see who you are and what you're capable of. It's so important for them to be in the room with you and see it. So I think it's just an opportunity. We're learning, we're listening, we're feeling your vibe, and we're thinking about what we're going to write for the rest of the season. So a lot of times I think actors who, maybe don't have as much live acting experience or who have a small part in a table read don't really see it as a time to shine, but I would encourage people to do so. Because you never know. And, and everybody's there and listening and thinking, and you're getting it into people's minds, and they're thinking about you for other things too. So I would just see it as an opportunity. And I think for me, I think a lot about, as I've, gotten older in this business, I see myself in more of a maternal role, and I'm sort of unapologetic about it. I feel very maternal towards actors. I feel protective of them. And I want them to feel safe, because what they do is scary. And I know I've also been around long enough to see so much mistreatment and bad behavior of actors, of women in particular. And so I want actors to feel, like they can speak up, they can advocate for themselves, and they can ask questions. And if they're being treated like, their voice doesn't matter, or their questions don't matter, their concerns or their discomfort doesn't matter, find the person to whom it does matter and speak to that person. On my show, that tends to be me. And I want it to be me. I have a real hard time with, and have always had a very hard time with, people putting their hand, and this is more common than you would expect it to be. I find it so aggravating, but, directors or other people who will walk over to actors, first ADs, and move them. It generally happens to women. You don't see it happen to men. Move them with their hands. I don't allow that to happen. If I see that happening, I have a conversation with whoever did it about how that's a person, and you need to use their words in asking them to move, and not a chair. So things like that. I encourage people. I encourage actors to, know their worth and be advocates for being treated with respect.
I would add to that, be nice to the PAs. Don't be a part of creating the safe space, and understand that this is exceptionally hard on everyone. It's hard work. I mean, we're not pouring cement and but it's hard emotional work. And I think it's really important to be kind to everybody. And I would say, for me, the thing that our cast, if this was either inadvertent or Laura and Jody are geniuses, but everybody in our cast was really knew their characters, but was very flexible on the day. So if we would come in and start working on something and the words just weren't working, no one held closely this, line of dialogue that they'd been fixated on for weeks while reading the script. They were very flexible. So I would say be the compass, be the North Star of your character for the showrunner. That for me was really important, was knowing that these actors kind of were embodying these people and really understood them. And then be flexible in the conversations of keeping that in mind. But if the scene didn't go X, Y, and Z, finding a way to do it. But really, please just be nice to the PAs. Don't make me don't make anybody have to have the conversation of safe space, because you want everyone to be safe and comfortable there. And I think it's really important to be, you're the people that everyone looks to for the most part as actors. You're the most recognizable people. And I think you set the tone for that. Elle Fanning, who is number one on our show. When you're number one, that sets a tone, and she knows she's setting the tone of what the show is, and she's incredibly gracious and kind and relaxed on set, and doesn't provide more stress. So I think leading by example is really important.
I think for me, it's also, Liz, you were talking about this before, but when you're on set and you're filming, the clock has started. So if you do have questions, even if, we haven't made a chance to have a character meeting, I would say reach out, try, because every time an actor did that, it was actually incredibly helpful. And it not only helped resolve things in scene, but it also helped us have a stronger relationship on set. So then I could, they knew me better. They felt more comfortable coming up to me if something did happen. The other thing that we dealt with in our show was there was a few scenes of violence. And so we had intimacy coordinators and we had rehearsals around that. And I think that's a new thing for some actors. And I think going into that with a really open mind and really supportive point of view for the other actor is really, really important, so that when you go to actually film that on set, they're very intense. It's very intense for the crew. It's very intense for the other actor. I think so being present during those rehearsals and being present during those conversations with the intimacy coordinator is really important.
I actually say that we mostly do table reads for the actors in a way. It's like, we want to make sure everyone involved has read the whole script and heard the other people reading the script before the day. And I try to invite actors to just kind of see the matrix around them, which is that they have the producing director, they have the director of their episode, they have the writer covering their episode, and they have me. That's 4 right off the top of my head that they can come to before the day. And it's because, especially on shows like You and The Magicians that are quite complicated from a plot perspective and a tonal tightrope, where part of the thing we're doing is holding hands and saying, I'm not going to make you look bad. You're not going to make me look, we're going to fucking commit to this thing. And it's not going to be cheesy. It's going to be cool, right? But you have to come in with confidence on the day. This scene makes basic plot sense. And on the day, sometimes we all get nervous. Oh God, what if this doesn't work? I find that like something that just really calms everyone down is let's just talk beforehand. Like if something is confusing, if you have a little idea, like even a small thing that you feel like speaks to the character in a deeper way. I had wonderful conversations with Saffron Burrows, who was playing Love's mother on You, who would have just these little tiny ideas she'd want to bring. Like she didn't need my permission to do these things, but when she told me about them, I understood the character better. So I feel like I'm just saying what Silka just said, that like we love having these conversations. We love collaboration, or we'd all be writing novels. But if you give us a chance to react, the dialogue's going to be better. We'll have more time to think about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have had to say that to people too. Like, it's so great if you ask a question, but it's a lot better not when we're about to shoot it, because I'm a writer. I take a little time to process and think. So, actors tend to be, quicker and more reactive, but I need a minute. So it's so much better if you had asked me yesterday. So I try to say, a little in advance is better for the way most of us think and process.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with all of this. I don't have that much to add because you guys have covered it, but I think the combination of being deeply prepared and deeply open is the magic. It's like, I want your ideas. I want your crazy, like, let me just try this thing. I also want to know that you have the lines, you have thought about it, you're on time, you're respectful of what the crew is doing. I think it is both be very all over your character and your shit, and be very aware that there are lots of other people making the show, and it's being able to hold those two, on the day that, those are the people I love working with, and that I feel like I know how to get the best out of them creatively, and, and they're doing the best job creatively because they're present, respectful, there's a lot to it, considering how many people are showing up to make them look fantastic.
Be deeply prepared, be deeply open. I think that's just good, life advice, right? Yeah. Wonderful. Well, on behalf of SAG-AFTRA Foundation, I want to thank all of you for sharing your craft and insights and experiences with SAG-AFTRA performers. This has been such a powerhouse panel, and I loved having this conversation with all of you.
Thanks. Yeah. It was so nice to be
Thank you so much. It was great.